is over with. Anyway, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Melissa Rudolph. I'm the chair of American Mensa. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the program that Vicki is part of. The program that she's part of is called LEAP for short, which stands for Leadership Exchange Ambassador Program. And what it is a program that began internationally in 2009 with an idea of having people who are leaders in their national groups exchange information and benefit from each other's advice. Rather than reinventing the wheel, we were hoping to make more wheels instead of doing the old things. And the program's been going on since we had 2010, 2011, this is the third year for it. And this year we have 5 participants in the program, of which Vicki is one. And the other, 2 of the others did their programs this afternoon, and we have 1 more program tonight, and then 1 at noon tomorrow. And I encourage you all to go and listen to these people because they travel a long way, most of them very long way. And they're here to help our leaders in America learn things, and also they take back home valuable lessons. Anyway, let's get on to it. This is Vicki Hurd. She's from Mensa, Canada, and I'll let her take it from here.
Okay, good evening, folks. So I am from Mensa, Canada, but someone questioned me today. I actually was born in Sydney, Australia, so just think, so you don't sit there for an hour wondering why the heck I sound funny for a Canadian. That is the explanation. And I'm thrilled to be here in Reno, representing Mensa Canada as a LEAP ambassador, and I've got some Canadian friends in the front row here to support me. And so thank you for taking a leap of faith with all of our participants. And we've got 2 more of them coming in right now. So and I'd like to thank Mensa International for sponsoring and supporting such an exciting program. So I'll go to the next slide. So I know you'll be amazed at this and think I must have joined Mensa when I was 2 years old, but I've actually been a member of Mensa for 25 years, and I'm not all that nervous. Like, if anyone was at the awards luncheon today, someone said they were going to picture that they were just speaking to 2 people rather than a big crowd, and another guy said he was going to imagine that the audience members were all naked. Well, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to picture you all coming to a regional gathering that we're hosting next year in Lake Louise. So, you know, nothing like a gratuitous plug, but at least I'm not selling anything. So if you want to come up and get one of these at the end of the talk, we'd be very happy to see you all in Lake Louise, which is a very beautiful part of the world next year. So I've been involved on the board of Mensa Calgary for more than 20 years. I'm currently National Treasurer for Mensa Canada, and I've been on the national board for 2 years. I've attended AGs and RGs in the US, Canada, and America, so I've been exposed to a lot of Mensa settings, and I've loved almost every minute of my Mensa involvement, but have to acknowledge that Mensans at every level of the organisation face a unique set of challenges. And so my attention today is to address some of those challenges and present a plausible theory that may help to explain these challenges and perhaps help us come up with ways to deal with them in all our respective Mensa settings. So if you want to go ahead. So to apply for the LEAP program, we had to produce a YouTube video. So I'm sure it was so that the LEAP committee could determine that we weren't a bunch of, you know, inarticulate, boring people. But I did a little tongue-in-cheek sort of exercise in my video where I was describing dysfunctional types that keep surfacing in a Mensa setting, and I guess the LEAP committee didn't mind a little bit of levity, seeing they chose me, but I thought I'd just go through them quickly here today as well, and wonder if any of you can recognise any of these types. So I'm an accountant as a day job, so I've spent my whole life trying to disprove that boring accountant stereotype. So I've liberally used Google Images to help visualize the concepts that I'm talking about. So I've ripped them all off the internet, so I'd like to just thank the internet and Google Images for making this so much easy and so fun to illustrate and support my theories. So if you recognise any of the concepts I'm presenting today, please feel free to give me nods of encouragement. And please, I'm quite ambitious here today in what I'm trying to get through. So if you could save your questions and comments to the end, and then we can get into a little bit of a group discussion, that would be very welcome. So, okay, the first group I was talking about are the silent majority. And we all know these, I think in every group. We have many members that have been members for years. They pay their membership dues every year. Well, they're happy to take their money. They do no harm to the organisation, but one wonders what benefits and rationale they have for maintaining membership in an organisation they really don't seem to want to have to participate in at all. Mensa Canada rewards members that have reached the 25-year mark and present them with a nice certificate. So in Calgary, which is my local chapter, we'll contact people and say, hey, we've got your 25-year certificate, come to this event and we'll give you a presentation of it. And these people generally decline and ask us to mail it to them, so they can't even make it to one event in 25 years. We do mail it to them, but I'm sure that other people in other groups recognise that they've got a silent majority out there. So my second type, these are armchair quarterbacks. These are the ones that sit back and throw all their ideas. They lob their ideas at all the intrepid volunteers. I'm sure we've got a lot of intrepid volunteers in here today. But, you know, these are the guys that say, you should do this, you should organise that, you should chastise that person, and these suggestions are preferable to all the usual litany of complaints and criticism hurled in our direction. But the best way to disarm or sack these armchair quarterbacks is to make them responsible for implementing their own ideas. Like, that usually shuts them down in a big hurry, and they're really quite aghast and taken aback that you would even suggest that they should take some responsibility and some action within the organisation. So our third group, the shooting stars, these are the Mensans that join in a peak of excitement, and they're so enthusiastic and excited about belonging to this organisation, and they come up with great ideas that they're going to implement in that, and so you sit back and wait for them to do it, and suddenly they just sort of fizzle out and burn out in a big hurry and disappear from the scene. And I've never really understood what made this happen, whether they're disillusioned, whether they're disappointed, whether they've been insulted somewhere along the way. But I know in Calgary, we're always a little wary of newcomers. We're welcoming, but wary of newcomers, just because we've seen so many shooting stars. In fact, I think about 2 years ago, we had a regular monthly event and we had a new member show up, and it was a good night where it was like a big party, there was entertaining, there was lots of conversation and that. And he contacted us after that and said, you know, I'm CEO of this entertainment company and we've got a private theatre that seats 18 people. Would you guys like to hold movie nights at my private theatre? And we're like, yes, yes. And you know what? We've never seen him since, and then he contacted us once or twice to say, sorry, I've been really busy with work. So that's an illustration of a shooting star, so don't get your hopes up too much until these people can really prove that they can actually do something. So now, the hopeful crazies, and I'm sure we've all met some of these are people that, you know, have mental or social adjustment issues, and they decide that all their issues are due to the fact that they're highly intelligent. So they join Mensa, and they're all excited, thinking it's going to be a huge homecoming, there's going to be group hugs, they're suddenly going to feel a great sense of belonging. So when they join Mensa, they get disappointed in a big hurry because, you know, if they are truly crazy, it's just as likely that Mensans will find them as crazy as the rest of the population. So unfortunately, Mensa isn't the antidote to their social ineptitude or mental instability. So our next group, delusional saviours, these are the new Mensans who use their superior skills of deductive reasoning to diagnose Mensa's faults, announcing that they have the solution to all that ails Mensa. So these delusional newbies are shocked to discover that the stalwart long-term Mensans don't all shout hallelujah, drop to their knees and hand over the key of the organisation to them. So delusional saviours don't stick around too long unless, they get a reality check and start to realise what it really takes to keep the Mensa machine going over the long term. So, and this group, I love this image. Their eyes are too big for their bellies, and so this cast of characters enthusiastically volunteer for large roles within Mensa. They'll want the local secretary role, newsletter editor, marketing coordinator, but they never fulfill the roles they step into, and they always have bailout excuses that don't really stand up to real-world scrutiny. I had one volunteer last year tell me she had a bad year because she personally knew people affected by the Brisbane floods, the Japanese earthquake and tsunami, and the Christchurch earthquake all in one year. So my inner voice was crying, yeah, wimp. Anyway, so when I produced my application video, Millie Norrie, the president of Mensa Canada and a good friend, watched it and she said, oh my God, I can relate to all those types. She said, but you forgot one. And she correctly pointed out that I'd forgotten one, which I've included now. So I called these people weapons of mass destruction. And not only are they made at Mensa, or a particular Mensan, but they do as much collateral damage on their way out as possible. So a few years back, we had a dynamo woman join Mensa Calgary. And became local secretary, and she was only a member for 3 years, but in that time she instigated fights with 23 members, and I know that because another committee member and I kept count. And after quitting, she sent her ranting manifesto to the membership, and a few members did quit just because they were a little disgusted by such a public display of venom. So anyway, this all begs the question, why is there so much dysfunction in Mensa settings? And I challenge you to put in dysfunction and ask for Google Images. Everything came up as erectile dysfunction. But I want you to imagine that he's looking at his navel, as I'm considering this to be quite a navel-gazing exercise for all of us Mensans. So anyway, to borrow a phrase from Oprah, who I miss greatly after she retired, but my aha moment came when I was studying an MBA and I read an article and in a chapter about team dynamics, and this phrase just about jumped off the page at me. So it said the most disaster-prone team is the one that is exclusively composed of very clever people. And I'd been in Mensa for many years prior to this, and I'm going, oh my goodness. Suddenly I had a clue and even evidence that might explain the common dysfunction in Mensa settings. So,
just a quick aside, that was also in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
Oh, okay. All right. Mensans always know this. So. And by the way, I'm not a psychologist or anything. This is just my little personal journey of discovery. So the article was describing the work of a guy called Dr. Meredith Belbin, and he wrote a landmark management book called Management Teams, Why They Succeed and Fail. So this came out in 1980. And it's been so successful that he's like one of these huge, rich psychologists that's built a huge business around this. And his methodology is employed by lots of major organisations around the world and is touted by lots of major management consulting firms in the world. And you can actually certify and become a certified Belbin person that does this team theory stuff and diagnoses problems within organisations. So I purchased the book, hoping it would contain details to support my aha moment, and fortunately I was amply rewarded. So I'm getting a little dry details here, but Belbin worked at the Henley Management College, which is part of Cambridge University in the UK. And he was an industrial psychologist, and in the late 60s, computers had developed to a stage where they could compile a lot of data in a quick period of time, which made this whole methodology possible. So this was a game he developed, so I thought if I said game, that would draw in the Mensa crowd a little bit. And I can actually relate to this, because when I did a business degree in the early 80s, we had to do a course called managerial simulation, where we did an exercise exactly like this, but you formed a bunch of training managers in training into groups that you called companies, and then you threw a bunch of management scenarios at them, and they had to strategize ways in which to deal with, to make decisions, to decide on buying or selling assets. And the measure of success was purely on the amount of assets that team had at the end of the exercise. So it was, you know, it was very easily and quantifiable degree of success rather than subjective degrees of how successful the teams had been. So this was the first game, the executive management exercise, which went for over a week. They did this for 9 years at Cambridge, and they came up with even a shorter game, which was called Teamopoly, and anyone that knows Monopoly will recognise this, that they use the whole principles of Monopoly to train teams. And the whole purpose of the exercise was really to teach strategic decision making to these management trainees, but the team of researchers used it as a laboratory to figure out what the characteristics were of the people within successful teams as opposed to losing teams. So they used to give the participants psychometric tests. So they gave them IQ tests, they gave them personality tests, they gave them tests to determine how creative the people were, and then they started to study the results. So over 9 years of research, at stage one, they just started by forming random teams of participants in the management exercises. And then at stage two, they started experimenting and engineering the teams by assigning members with similar test scores to the same team. So, you know, they put all extroverts in a team, introverts in a team, and did various experiments just to see what combinations worked and what combinations were bad. So in stage three, they tested specific hypotheses and forecast team outcomes. And after 9 years, they were able to predict the success or failure of a team based on the personality profiles of the people within that team before the team had even started work, which was, you know, quite astounding at that time. So has anyone ever heard of the Apollo syndrome? Great. So these exercises started in about 1967. So at that time, the Apollo program, space program, was very prominent and the biggest thing happening in the world. So they gave the companies that they formed in these exercises, you know, they originally called them Company A, Company B, or whatever, and then they gave them names. So they started to call Company A Apollo Team. So if you want to go to the next. So when they formed the Apollo team, when they started engineering them, they started to put the smartest people all on one team called the Apollo team. And funnily enough, the research strategy was identified by everyone in the exercise, and everyone was protesting it being placed at such an unfair advantage. And I couldn't resist putting that quote from Belbin's book in: when very clever people are put together in a group, there is no disguising the fact. And you know, if you've been to any AG in the past, like this one, I think, you know, you could agree with that statement. And it seemed fairly obvious to all that a team of clever people should win the game that placed an emphasis on cleverness. However, the team result, and for the foreign people in the crowd, this is L for loser. It was an astonishing disappointment. The first Apollo team finished in last place out of 8 teams, and they, on average, Apollo teams were generally the worst performers. So I like this quote as well. They were seldom disappointed with the lessons that Apollo companies taught both their own members and the ever-interested onlookers from other companies. So reading between that lines, I'm guessing that the Apollo teams created quite an entertaining spectacle, and which entertained both researchers and the other guys. But I think it was irresistible to these researchers not to keep creating Apollo teams, you know, which says something for intelligent teams. I don't have the results for all 25 trials that they did, but disappointingly, the Apollo team only came first place out of 8 teams 3 times, which is an appalling 12%. The most common placing was 6th place out of 8 teams, which is very, very poor. So that was 24% of the times, and the next most common spot was 4th place out of 8 teams, or 16% of the time. So why the underachievement? So this failure seemed to be due to certain flaws in the way the team operated, and researchers and observers documented everything to the nth degree, so they were able to document 4 main flaws. So, okay, so I'm wondering if anyone can relate to any of these flaws in mental setting. So excessive time spent in abortive or destructive debate, trying to persuade other team members to adopt their own view. They said no one ever converted anyone else to their view, and no one ever converted to another person's view. And they demonstrated a flair for spotting weaknesses in others' arguments. So I'm a fan of Celebrity Apprentice. I don't know if anyone else here is, but in the latest episode, Penn Jillette, the magician, proved to be a very intelligent guy, but the other guys kept complaining, oh, you're being too negative, every idea you're telling us why it doesn't work. And this would be a perfect example of this. So a plausible explanation of why this may happen. So this is what Belbin proposed, that he said maybe members of Apollo teams aspire to apply their critical minds to the most difficult and intellectually enticing parts of the exercise. So everyone was into analysis and counter-analysis, and debating skills don't bind people together. They usually cause rifts and divisions, and people are at each other's throats. So flaw 2 was there was difficulties in their decision making, there was little coherence in the decisions reached, and several pressing and necessary jobs were often omitted. Okay, people are laughing, so I'm thinking there are some people that can relate to that. And then flaw 3, team members tended to act along their own favourite lines without taking account of what fellow members were doing, and the team proved difficult to manage. Now, what do you think? So I attended last year's AG in Portland, and as soon as I arrived in Portland, I joined the geocaching exercise. Did anyone here do that exercise at all? Okay, so teams were supposed to stick together and navigate their way to Portland landmarks, and not my team. So 7 people on my team. We had team members spread over a 3-block area at any given point in time. 2 were racing ahead, intent on doing all the navigating. A person with a leg injury and 2 supporters were trailing behind, and my partner and I were kind of in the middle, trying not to lose sight of the front runners and trying not to abandon the lame Mensans at the back. But when we reached each landmark, we had to have a group photo taken. So this was people acting along their own favourite lines, and failing to realise that the team should work together. And so, why are we difficult to manage? And this is what Belbin found. Intelligent team members showed remarkable resistance to any form of imposed organisation. Preferences for socially satisfying but anarchic autonomy. I don't normally say that word, so. Intelligent people have difficulty distinguishing between their role and what they see as the leader's role. And if thwarted by the leader of the group, they're likely to disrupt rather than contribute to the effective functioning of the group. So, can anyone here spot some of their own personal characteristics? Because no. I can. I can definitely spot that. So flaw 4. In some instances, teams recognised what was happening, but overcompensated by avoiding confrontation and probably group hugs all around and that, which equally led to problems in decision making. So, is there anyone present who hasn't experienced any of these flaws in their own Mensa settings?
If that's the case, you're damn lucky.
Pardon?
If that's the case, you're damn lucky.
No one's got their hand up, by the way. So, the result of these flaws. So, destructive tendencies can result in underachievement, okay? People with high analytical abilities are not necessarily creative, but I would suggest that they're too arrogant to ever admit that. And a gifted person with creative ability will not necessarily flourish in an Apollo team, because the other team members are probably picking out all the weaknesses in their argument and thinking that their ideas would be better. And Apollo teams were not effectively creative teams. So, but don't forget that we did have 12% of Apollo teams were successful, so they really studied the characteristics of successful Apollo teams, which I think is highly relevant to all of us here. So they demonstrated the absence of highly dominant individuals on successful Apollo teams, and there was a particular style of leadership that seemed unique to successful Apollo teams as compared to successful general teams. So they described the particular style of leadership as being suspicious and sceptical people. I do not know why, but the people imposed some shape or pattern on group discussions. So that was like the hooting cat type thing, maybe someone that can corral the cats. And tough but not dominant. So anyway, so that's very interesting. So what is the application for Mensans? So highly intelligent people seem to need a different style of leadership than those that are not so gifted. And, here's a little theory, a rhetorical question at this stage. Does our intellectual competitiveness, which is rewarded so often in educational settings, disadvantage our ability to work on teams? So, are we doomed to fail, or are they lessons we can extract from this theory? So now I'll get into Belbin's team roles. And Belbin, in his research, he identified 8 team roles, and later on in his research he came up with a 9th one, but he said that every team kind of needs to have all these roles covered. So a team of 3 people could cover these roles as long as you made sure that those 3 people took on each of those roles. And so I'll quickly go through them today. So here is an illustration of Belbin's team roles, and they're described as components of a balanced team, but I thought those images were a little boring, so I used Google Images to my advantage to come up with more descriptive images. So, so Shaper, in case any of the males in the audience had fallen asleep at this stage of the presentation, I thought this would bring them back. Oh yeah, 8888.com. So the Shaper role, so here's the characteristics, and I just want to speed through these, but people may, go looking at these may see what they can identify to most. So a Shaper is a real dynamic person. They've got tremendous energy. They're probably extroverts. They challenge the team to improve. And in my secret Mensa coding, that you may be able to decipher, the pros are in white and the cons are in pink. And they're the one who shakes things up to make sure that all possibilities are considered. The con is they risk becoming aggressive and bad-humoured in attempts to get through things done because they're very goal-oriented. And I think the bottom one is the most important one. So Shapers often see obstacles as exciting challenges, and they tend to have the courage to push on when others feel like quitting, because we know a lot of volunteers won't jump over that first hurdle that they come across. So the second role, he called the coordinator role, and this can also be called the team chair. And these people have the ability to step back to see the big picture. They're confident, stable and mature. That's kind of necessary to truly lead a team. They can recognise abilities in others and delegate to the right person to get things done, and they kind of keep coordinating everyone to make sure everyone's doing the task. The big con here, which I saw this in someone when I chaired the Canadian AG last year, our local LoCSec delegated everything, and everyone's like, what the heck are you doing? But they're sometimes perceived to be manipulative and will tend to delegate all work, leaving nothing but the delegating for them to do. So team worker, I couldn't come up with any exciting images for team worker, and this is necessary. They're good at smooth people skills, not offending anybody, getting things done. Often it's a low-profile role, unsexy role in today's parlance, but the beneficial effects of the team worker can go unnoticed until suddenly they're absent, and suddenly all sorts of things start falling apart, and you're not really noticing what this sort of person is really doing. So, and their con is they won't take sides, so they might not be able to make a decisive action when it's needed. So our fourth one, complete a finisher. So these people, I borrowed a phrase from my son. He called it, I was nagging him once when he was younger in junior high, and he called me an anal butt monkey. These people are the necessary but sometimes painful people that are fabulous at detail. They're fabulously driven to check, double check, like no errors are going to get by them. And they're really self-driven to ensure that everything's accurate and take pride in perfection. So, the con is they may frustrate their teammates by worrying excessively about details. They may, take a little bit of time doing it and that. But it's great to have someone to do the quality control on the team. So the implementer role on the team, they take their colleague suggestions, they make things happen, they can always be relied upon to deliver, and they're motivated by their loyalty to the team or company. They're not motivated, they're not looking after their own self-interest, they're really doing it for the team or the company. And, but they may be seen as a little rigid and inflexible, because once they get an idea, they're going to go with it. And they may, have difficulty being a little flexible with that. So, okay, it's female's turn now. Monitor evaluator. So this is the wise person on the team. The person, I'm thinking in my head, the slow talking person, the person that's slow, methodical, but really thinking and can often give a reality check to the excited people that are racing ahead, trying to give their great ideas. And they can become very critical, dampen enthusiasm, and they have a hard time inspiring themselves or others to be passionate about their work, because they're probably doing everything at a very slow pace, but they are contributing towards the team. So we have a role called the plant, and Belbin's researchers found that every team needed to have at least one creative person on the team for it to succeed. If they had a bunch of team workers or that, you'd have people ready to do the work, but they'd never come up with good ideas to work upon. And using psychometric testing, the researchers were able to identify and plant a creative person on each team. So that's where that name came from. So the descriptor said bears a strong resemblance to the popular caricature of the absent-minded professor inventor, which is why I pulled Einstein's image for it. And I like the cons on this one. Often has a hard time communicating ideas to others, and multiple plans in a team can be a big disaster, because you're going to have a whole bunch of ideas generated, and they don't really have the ability to actually implement those ideas. And I don't know about you, but I think I may have spotted a few plants walking around the Reno RG so far this week. But resource investigator, this is the last of the original 8 roles. The resource investigator gives the team a rush of enthusiasm at the start of the project, is focused outside the team, is a great networker, has a finger firmly on the pulse of the outside world. That's the real world, so that may be a little difficult for some instances as well. And they make an excellent networker. So the con is, they're all excited about starting of the project. They're not that into detail, and then they start to get a little bored towards the end of the project when it's kind of more clean-up time rather than all the exciting forge-ahead time. So after they put this into action, they started to discover another team role could be necessary, and that was the specialist. So these are people that are the real gurus and go-to persons for a particular area of expertise. Their only thing is they may be a little narrowly focused on their one area of expertise and may not want to know about any of the other stuff going on, but they can certainly share and provide the expertise where it's needed. So here's a summary of Belbin's team roles. They can be divided nicely into 3 separate areas. We've got the action figures, the shapers, the implementers, the completer finishers. We've got the social roles, the coordinators, resource investigators and team workers, and then the thinkers are the monitor evaluators, plants and specialists. So how can Mensa apply team role theory? Well, one way we could is We could just ignore it or deny it. We could panic and try to escape it, or we could embrace team role theory and figure out how we can use it to our best advantage in Mensa settings. So I guess step one would be to accept the potential for team dysfunction, and step two, address the potential for team dysfunction. That's another one for the ladies, Don Draper from Mad Men.
Dysfunction. No, I just have been in situations where I wished I could have interviewed all the people. I was getting the job, but if I could have interviewed all those people who were going to be around me, they would have taken it.
Well, I learned very early in management or working on teams and that it is much easier to apply team role theory when you can handpick your team rather than when you inherit a team. And then when you've got teams of volunteers, you get who actually volunteers. So, it's not a perfect world, but, if you take some of these things into consideration, it may help somewhat.
How fluid are these definitions? Like, can you start with someone that's, say, a plant and move them over to?
Well, I'm sure anyone could do any of the 19 roles, but I think they would have a natural tendency and preference to gravitate towards a few roles, and they'd try to avoid other roles. And so Belbin's research team, there's a big questionnaire, like you can pay a lot of money in British pounds to get their tests and do a self-assessment, and they would give you a graph showing which team roles you were most suited for. They'd give you all 19 roles and show, in what order that you would be good for. But I think most people, if they looked at those team roles, would kind of know what ones would be best for them. Like for me, I know that research investigator and shaper would be more my style than a completer finisher. Even though I'm an accountant by day, I don't like the detail and the getting over anal on things.
So you could almost have like a minimum of 3, as long
I
as
think
each person juggled their portions.
Or anyone that's a huge volunteer in Mensa, you've probably had events or something where you've actually done all 9 roles, because people that really take on the responsibility and are really concerned with the success will fill any gap that exists. Ideally, you're going to have a supportive team where that will be evenly spread, but realities are some people are going to be dropping the ball in certain areas and that, or my suggestion is, so badly composed teams would exhibit team role clashes, overlaps, or voids. My question would be, is that what's happening in Mensa setting? So Mensa could be described as a clone culture. So do too many of us, aspire to fill the same team roles, and at the same time, do too many of us, avoid the same necessary team roles? So that would be my question. So I'd feel remiss if I didn't propose some possible solutions for avoiding Apollo team flaws, and this is only something that I brainstorm myself, so you may disagree or whatever. But Flaw 1A was excessive time spent in abortive or destructive debate. So what could we do? We could develop timelines to limit the debate. We could develop ground rules to encourage constructive rather than destructive debate. Flaw 1B was trying to persuade other team members to adopt their own views. So we could structure decision deadlines and stress that one workable idea is needed, not the perfect idea. And so the idea also belongs to the team, not to the individual. So you don't have to compete to see who picks the idea. You just want one idea that goes, yay, we can do that, we can make that thing happen. So Flaw 1C was spotting weaknesses in other arguments, which I'm sure we're all good at, but we could implement SWOT analysis for those people that aren't business majors. That's identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of the best idea. So that would get people away from just identifying weaknesses. They would be forced to look at strengths and opportunities and threats as well. So Flaw 2A, difficulties in decision making with little coherence in the decisions reached. We could formalise the decision-making process, emphasising the feasibility of implementing the ideas of paramount importance. And Flaw 2B, several pressing and necessary jobs were often omitted. Like, if we talked about this team role theory and knew certain roles have to be fulfilled, maybe we should assign those team roles amongst the members of the team, clarifying that each role is essential and, you know, all of them, one's not sexier than the other, because if some of the other ones don't get done, you're not going to be successful anyway. And Flaw 3, team members acted along their own favourite lines without taking account of what other fellow members were doing. So if we formally assigned team roles to people and then monitored their progress and highlighted, you know, where people are getting off track, and that could be helpful. So Flaw 4 was when team members recognised what was happening, they overcompensated. So again, if we developed a dispute resolution process, which I'm sure Roland's going to be talking about something like that later this evening, and we should also adopt learnings from successful Apollo teams. So the absence of highly dominant individuals, if only we could do this in all arenas of life, but don't appoint highly dominant individuals to team leadership roles. We could counsel highly dominant individuals to control their dominant tendencies. Like, this could be an overly simplistic solution, because sometimes those people are pretty intimidating. And remove highly dominant individuals from the team if the team is suffering or team members are quitting to escape being overpowered. So, you know, that happens in a lot of arenas in life, not just in a Mensa setting. And another one they talked about a particular style of leadership that they found in leaders of successful Apollo teams. And my suggestion would be let the team select the team leader, then they'd have buy-in, which was mentioned earlier in the day, and it could be someone that they could respect perhaps, and clarify all team roles to reinforce all are essential to the team's success. So Mensa summary. So Mensa is a great organisation with unlimited potential, and Mensa volunteers are its lifeblood, but can also be challenging to manage. So let's use all available resources at hand to improve the performance of our Mensa teams, including team role theory, and then good luck. Because you know, theory is one thing, putting it into practice is another. So I put a before photo here, and followed by our after photo of everyone working nicely. So that's what I had in terms of my presentation, but of course I'm sure you're bursting with comments and ideas about that. So Ted?
In recruited the 9 roles, each column, the 3 in that column had stuff in common. Were there any commonalities in the rows?
Do you know how to get it to slide? Pardon?
There we go.
Slide 52. Yeah, I said it was ambitious. Yeah, so they were the roles. So I just know personally that my characteristics, I'd probably be shaper, resource investigator. So I'd be on the more social action side rather than a thinker. But there's other people I know that would be more like thinkers. Like, is there anyone else that, so it doesn't necessarily mean that your 3 preferred roles would all fall under one of those columns. It would just be your preferences.
They don't go across.
They don't necessarily go across. I think that's just random, but that's more the characteristics of them. So does anyone identify with a particular role more than another?
Specialist.
You're a specialist?
I'm an ASPE. By definition, I'm a specialist.
Okay, and what would you specialise in?
In particular, I find history and like I'm an archaeology student.
Okay, so you're an expert in a few fields.
Yeah.
And you're not that interested in other stuff.
Well, like people discuss cars and get me from A to B. That's it.
Okay.
I don't really know what's under the hood. I don't care. That's someone else's job.
Okay, and-
In the unsuccessful Apollo teams,
yes.
what of these team roles, double team roles, do they mostly fit? Because they're obviously not a mix of them, there must be a dominant one of these team roles.
Yeah, well,
Or is
when,
it something else?
no, so what they did was, they formed all these teams, and then they could measure which teams were successful. So then they'd start looking at the characteristics of the personalities on the successful teams, and they'd look at characteristics of, like, losing teams. And when they kept doing that over the years, they started to identify commonalities in successful teams, so they gradually, these roles started to come out of there.
So what you're saying is the successful Apollo teams had a good mix of these. Apollo teams in general don't have any specific built roles. It's just the ones that click together had the full mix.
Yeah, so I think they found out that having a diverse group of people on a team meant that you'd have people that would naturally adapt to these different 9 team roles. They did, it wasn't just Apollo teams, that had teams of anxious introverts and stable extroverts, and they experimented with a lot of different combinations, but the Apollo one was the one I jumped on because it seemed most relevant to a Mensa setting. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if it correlates at all with all the INFJ stuff, because a lot of Mensans walk around telling
Yes.
what their letters are.
Yeah, so the Myers-Briggs is one way of assessing people's personalities, but you can still have, you know, you've still got all your Myers-Briggs preferences, but you've still got to get these roles covered. So, you know, you can imagine a team where it's all shapers, so you've got all these people butting heads because they're all trying to lead in that, and you've got no monitor evaluators to tell you that you're full of crap or you're going down the wrong path. You've got no completer finishers that are actually going to get the job done with quality. So you may be, you know, be premature congratulators where you're pushing everything out without getting all your bases covered. Jean?
I just wanted to agree with the thing that more diverse groups work better. The most significant predictor of the longevity of CEOs and top corporations is the amount of diversity they have in their support staff and advisors.
Okay, yeah, so I'm a business graduate, and some people hire in their own likeness, so that's where you get clone cultures. And the other bad thing is when people hire yes men. So if you have to be right all the time, you're going to hire yes men, so you're going to have a bunch of weak sycophants who aren't going to tell you when you're going down the wrong path or that. So, you know, that's why you need variety. In Belbin's research, he said it was really funny because you're thinking that it wouldn't just be a Mensa group that would be an Apollo team, it would be any group where you have, you know, a lot of highly intelligent professionals. So he was laughing that NASA actually approached Belbin and one of his co-researchers to go and hold a workshop at NASA because surprisingly their teams weren't working as effectively as they would like them to. There seemed to be some dysfunction amongst their teams, and so he said they were all poised to go to NASA to do this exercise, but the NASA people couldn't agree on actually holding it or when to hold it or that. So NASA ended up cancelling the session and forfeiting quite a large deposit that they'd already paid to hold this session. So that was like just an illustration of the Apollo syndrome in action.
Apollo.
So does anyone think that did anyone see things that they hadn't seen before in terms of realizing that it was a total syndrome? Alyssa?
I just completed proofing a book on social organizations, and one of the terms they use in there, which I had never seen before, was chaotic. Have you heard of that?
Chaotic?
Chaotic. It's made up of 2 words, chaos and order. And this book maintains pretty much what you're saying, that they don't break out the different roles like this, but what they're saying is you must strike a balance between chaos, which is everybody going in a different direction, and order, which is cloning. So you have to strike that balance, and the most successful organizations are chaotic, and I think Mensa is one of them.
they try to apply structure, but we don't like structure. We want to go off and do our own thing. So in a way, we already have the elements that we need to be a successful organization, but we have to strike that balance.
Yes, and you know, herding cats is used often to describe, you know, organising Mensans. And I told someone today, my name's Herd, and I'm on the national board of Mensa Canada, and there's another person on the board called Brenda Van Katz. So we figured that we've got herding cats on the Mensa Canada national board. Yes?
Well, I have been involved in organizations that tried to screen volunteers as they came in, you know, identify what their talents were. And they tended to look at, you know, their talents of, you know, can you type really well, or do you hit a baseball well? Is there a way to screen people for personality on the front end so that you have them in the right places?
Yeah, well, what Belbin's team and all the management consultants and everyone making a fortune off this methodology in the real world, they'll often go into organisations and give the whole management team psychometric tests and that, and then determine what roles they're missing so that when they're interviewing new candidates, they can go looking for a plant or go looking for particular roles. It can be useful that way. It can also be useful to determine that, hey, you've got too many of these people, maybe you need to get rid of some of these or structure it differently.
But
so
organizations don't do it themselves,
No.
basically. Somebody has to come in from the outside and say, you've got to.
Well, unless, you know, they're smart and they can do all the research and take it back. But usually, I've worked for lots of organisations, they'll often not listen to anyone that works there. They often will listen to what an external high-paid consulting firm tells them when they've got people under their own roofs. And I see people nodding here. So as a smart person working within an organisation, you know that they discount thinking you just do your little role there and shut up and that's good enough. And Belbin also found, he said people interview, the whole recruitment process is focused on the individual and what the individual qualities are, when really it's the team that's working and creating success. So you can hire really, really capable individuals, but they won't work well together. Whereas if you're looking at composing a well-functioning team, you've got to look at it at a different perspective. And my own theory is that recruiting is very flawed in industry today, but that's just my own personal little rant. So yeah, Cynthia?
Well, actually, I wanted to notice that some of these roles, I have seen them in some of my committees, and also that I didn't know about this theory, but I had recognized some of these patterns in the past. For example, the coordinator who delegates a lot and never does anything, or the thinker the plant who has these broad ideas but never committed to them. But in the meantime, I read a book which, regrettably, I don't remember the name or the author, but basically they make an analysis of different successful teams, famous teams like Steve Jobs and
Wozniak.
I really don't remember, Walt Disney, and
Successful cultures, right? Successful business cultures.
I really don't remember. I read it in Spanish, so I really don't know if it would be accurate as a translation. But the thing is that what it actually proposes is that you stop trying to make a team. And yes, it never says that, but actually that's the idea. What it says is that some of the most famous leaders, like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs, what they do is they look for people who are smarter than them, more talented than them in very specific tasks, and that they give them broad independence.
Yeah, maybe those guys were brilliant coordinators then.
So they don't step onto each other, they don't get to judge so much the idea. So everyone has their own path they are very, very happy and enthusiastic with. And only at certain points they are like reunited and to approach the broad goal of the company or of the project. And that's something I rescued, and I see these both things match perfectly.
Okay.
those of us who are Americans, the classic example of a dysfunctional team is the old New York Yankees. Everyone was a superstar in their own right. They all had huge egos, and they never, for years, learned to work with each other. They were all just individual contributors.
Yeah, and I'd say the same would be some of the US American Dream Team basketball Olympic teams where, you know, you pluck all those stars from the NBA and then they get beaten by some, you know, random country just because they're not functioning as a team because they're only put together for a special purpose. Alexandra?
Yes, I wanted to ask whether, I don't know the situation in Mensa Canada, do you have for your events or for your board enough candidates to make a choice of all these roles? Or is it just the theory how a successful team can be made once you have enough candidates for that?
Well, I've been on the national board for Mensa Canada for 2 years, but it is a very good board. I find there are no really domineering personalities. No one seems to have their own agenda. It seems to be a nice cooperative team. So I'm not sure that we've got every role covered, but you know, there's been a lot of controversy in the past. And I can remember when I first joined Mensa, some guy ran for president of Mensa Canada and he snail mailed in those days, every member in Canada with his platform. He got elected and I think he lasted 3 months. He just got to go to the OBD in Spain and then quit after like 3 months. And that would be an illustration of, like, you know, someone only doing it for their own agenda rather than for the good of the organisation.
Let me try and answer that question from a different perspective. I teach Belbin's roles assessments in classes.
Okay, so I'm not an expert, so if I've said anything wrong.
No. The goal is to teach the people that there are different roles on the team.
Yeah.
And no role is good or bad. A good team will have a mix of roles. But once they appreciate that this is their particular role, they can learn to work better with the other roles on the team.
Yes, yeah, which is the same as learning your Myers-Briggs profile or a DISC profile, which is another test that I've loved and found relevant, but it's to appreciate that different people have different styles and you can work with them as long as you've got an appreciation for where they're coming from. They're not wrong, they're just coming at it from a different angle. Sorry?
One thing that I saw that was very effective, I was on a team and things were not going well. There was a lot of storming going on. We were a short-term assignment. This was a very, very high-profile client. And we had all come together. Most of us didn't know each other. It was only 4 people. I knew one of the individuals, but I never met the other 2. And I know that some people don't like the phrase, there's no I in team. But that's what the team leader got up. And, you know, we had this little come to Jesus talk. And it was like, listen, we're all professional. There's no I in team. We have to work together to get this work done. And at the end, we did, you know, we all took this conversation to heart and we said, you're right. We don't argue. We are here for a job and we're going to do the best job possible. But the team leader really has to be able to motivate everybody to rise above their little petty differences and to say, you know, let's get cracking. If that team leader is able to do that and motivate those people, you can pull it out. And I think that's one thing that there should be practice done, because it will happen, but you've got to be able to rise above it.
Yeah, and like Dr. Phil says, and how's that working out for you? when people in relationships are always trying to win, you know, they're always trying to win, and it's like, well, that's not going to, it's not working, so take a different tack, you know?
Well, in businesses, I mean, yes, there are clone cultures and everything, but it seems to me that the social, the ones in the middle, the social roles, and maybe like the specialists that Albert Einstein's pie in the sky and they open to the door and stuff, those people are less valued because organizations don't recognize that there are some people that are the social glue that hold the room together.
I'm a social accountant, so, you know, like I've worked in places where they think you're a bimbo and they don't realise that I'm getting all sorts of intel because all the people in the organisation come tell me all sorts of things that I can incorporate in my job, or I get inside knowledge about all sorts of things.
It's
a valuable tactic.
I was proudest of was a newspaper where I was charge of the newsroom, and there was this one reporter who could not write her way out the paper bag. It was so bad, and every time an editor got one of her stories, they'd be complaining and saying, I'm gonna have to rewrite this, and, you know, it's all there, but it's all mixed up, and she's just such a terrible writer. And there was actually a lot of pressure to fire her, but she was there for years. And what I'm proudest of is that I saved her because she was the social glue. Everybody, you could watch people walk around the newsroom and kind of circle back, and when they were having an issue with a story or at home or anything, they were with her.
Yeah, and
She kept
that personality, yeah, it's like it's the social glue, and it raises morale and things like that, and that's undervalued, I think, especially in the organisations that are, you know, the anal butt monkey organisations. And as an accountant, you know, the stereotypical accountant is a little focused on the job and thinks all of that's superfluous.
Right.
And sorry, Sarah, in the black shirt.
Do you think it would be possible to kind of take an existing Mensa project, for instance, I'm thinking of like an AG or RG organizing committee, and actually map which role in a committee would map one of those 9 roles?
Well, funny you should mention that, because I think maybe the RG that I am organising next September in Lake Louise, that I could try this team role theory with my organisers, and I can report back onto how successful that was. And I don't know if anyone else wants to try it as well, but if people want to contact me, I can send them the presentation or any of the theory, and I highly recommend this book. I only bought it after I was chosen as a LEAP ambassador, and I've read it 4 times since then. It's very entertaining, very easy read, but you know, it's very interesting information. And
What's your email address? It's not in the program.
yeah, okay. vherd, H-E-R-D, at shaw, shaw.ca. Or if you take one of these brochures, it's also vanrg at shaw.ca.